It's time to go back into the heady days of late 90s shooters. A handful of programmers in Amsterdam under the name Team Apocalypse met up to create a total conversion of Quake for retail publishing. That game was Malice, coming out in 1997, just a month before Quake 2's debut, and despite it being mechanically advanced and creative, it's since been relegated to obscure forum posts and ModDB pages. It won't be long before the inevitable boomers start praising it to high heaven, so here's my zoomer take. OG Quake was really good as the first FPS I ever played on our family's aging Macintosh. Since then, like almost 2 decades ago, Quake is a competently fine id title that just never quite earned the character of Doom or even titles like Half-Life or Duke Nukem. Just not enough meme potential. This is why I enjoyed Malice, which plays like Quake but with a few solid improvements, which is a testament to the devs' craftsmanship and them understanding what made a good FPS. First things first, the lack of a re-release or technical support makes setting up Malice a slight problem. But I'll talk you through it. Install Quake along with WinQuake or GLQuake, then install the simple Quake launcher. Create a folder in your Quake directory named Malice, drag the Malice files from either a CD copy or an ISO file into that folder. Then use the SQ launcher while running the game in either of the 2 source ports. Malice has its own music tracks, apparently by James Anderson. Copy these into where Quakes are kept, either the folder or the tracks themselves, then hopefully it should run. If you like techno rock, it's fairly banging stuff that fits in better than Trent Reznor's score. The differences from Quake are apparent immediately, where an opening cutscene plays with a player, a mercenary called Damage, failing to receive his paycheck from the crime lord Bossman. After a brief argument, and despite there being clearly an eventual backstab on the way, you take up Bossman's job offer to clear up the rival Takahiro Syndicate across almost 20 different stages. The use of cutscenes in the Quake engine was pretty novel, and while they don't show off much besides 2 voiced characters, it does enable a bit more personality. Making the player an actual character was nothing new for the time, but how they do this on the Quake engine with text boxes and notes you read was interesting. Unlike Doom, Quake wasn't known for its intricate level design. That was until mods like Arcane Dimensions upended things. Malice, however, keeps the gameplay with more active levels and objectives. There is still a lot of keycard collecting, but there's a greater effort to make the stages more grounded and believable instead of more abstract gothic mazes. You'll spend most of your time in either urban cityscapes or industrial facilities with labs, terminals and machinery, a lot of which you can interact with. While every level ends with a portal, to get there requires overcoming some environmental challenge or minor puzzle. This can be operating and destroying machinery, timing various gates and switches, or platforming, which can involve moving objects around to scale them. The additional detailed modelling of rooms, of tables, computer screens and lights, furniture and plants makes each section stand out and not feel copy and pasted. It's very Half-Life or Unreal in this nature, and almost unrecognisable to Quake. Malice also uses scripted set pieces and boss encounters to conclude levels in a satisfying way, although they do repeat a couple of times. What this results in is a heap of memorable locations and firefights instead of the typical angles and corridors. With the gameplay, it's Quake, so it's pretty close to what you expect in regards to tight controls and fast movement, but like the general design, there are noticeable tweaks and additions to combat. Aside from collecting ammo, most of your arsenal needs to be reloaded manually. No longer can you spam the double-barreled shotgun, or in this case the auto shotgun. Your largely ineffective axe has now been swapped out for a decently effective magnum. Though not a powerhouse, it has unlimited rounds, making it a great way to save supplies for tougher fights. There's useful equipment in the game, such as parachutes to save from falling, hoverboards for faster movement, and drones that supposedly are used to scope out areas, though I barely used it. There's brief underwater sections that make use of piloting a submarine. The controls aren't half bad, and a fine reprieve from the constant running and gunning. Easily one of Malice's most impressive feats is having a nice armory of really fun guns and a great variety of enemies. Aside from the pistol, there's a classic Quake assortment of the shotgun, machine gun and rocket launcher, but they've been heavily modified to be more useful and effective in their roles. The basic shotgun fires 4 shells at once, and the auto shotgun burns through ammo but gives enemies pretty damn quickly. The Uzi and the chain gun deliver a lot of damage, but the latter is much less controllable. Ammunition for these 4 weapons are commonly dropped, so they'll become your go-to gear. Heavy duty weapons of the rocket and grenade launcher and pulse gun are modelled really well and have fantastic particle effects and animations. It's just a shame you won't use them as much on account of them being more stingy with ammunition and their only occasional placement into the levels. Because of the frequency of tight firefights, it's pretty hard to not die from using these. I enjoyed fighting the grunts and ogres the most in OG Quake, and if you share this sentiment you'll appreciate the roster here. Infantry mercs either use melee attacks or fire from a distance, with flamethrower equipped heavies backing them up. Dual wielding pistol chicks teleporting through the environment is very cool, and the later additions of mechs and drones up the difficulty substantially. The late game seems to throw less enemies at you, but what remains do put up a stiff fight. Unfortunately, time has not been kind to Malice. Through its own release bugs and general updates to Quake and modern operating systems, has accrued plentiful game-breaking bugs and issues. There's the small stuff like textures or models breaking or warping, music not properly playing, that kind of stuff. Then there's the greater issues of doors not opening despite having the required keys, end-level teleporters or switches not working, crucial pickups failing to spawn, and good old crashes. Some of this was the fault of the developers. In one part, you have to fall down a giant pit to proceed, but they forgot to add in a parachute, making the game unfinishable at release. This may have been patched out, though it wasn't in my version. Using noclip is a good way to bypass the more obnoxious barriers, but there are points where a cutscene won't trigger. When that happens, your best option is to play the next level via the SQ launcher, which means missing out on a few cutscenes. Ah well, I'm sure someone will eventually sort this out or point out a much simpler method of play, but information on Malice is uncommon to say the least. Strangely, perhaps a result of production issues, the bugs are more frequent in the later sections. Malice really does need tinkering or an overhaul by people much smarter at this stuff than me. I do think it's possible since it is just running off Quake, not some bizarro proprietary engine. Because when it's working most of the time, Malice is a lot of good old school fun that I can see retro throwback enthusiasts relishing. The firearms are hefty and feel nice to use, the levels have enough creativity that would make multiple playthroughs worthwhile, and it manages to not become boring through a good lineup of enemies. If you don't mind the bugs and installation hurdles of digging through your directory, I can highly recommend Malice.